Hi, I'm Tiana Shoei. I'm a writer, entrepreneur, leader, and energy. This is my podcast, Ain't Quite Right. Join me as we laugh, learn, and live big. Hello, everyone. This is Tiana Shoei, and welcome to my podcast, Tiana Shoei Ain't Quite Right. Thank you so much for tuning in today. This is episode 8. And it's about values, how to reconcile your values for true peace and fulfillment. I'm actually really excited about today's subject because I've spent a lot of time both thinking about this and preparing this. In fact, so much time that as I was preparing the content, I realized that I needed notes for you guys because I'm going to go through so much material today in the time that we have together that I thought it was a little unfair just to leave it in pure audio. So I'm actually going to make the notes available to you. And the notes are going to be available in the podcast description. So there's the episode details that will show up on whatever platform you're listening to this on. And I've also got it on my website at tianashoei.com under the resources tab, and you'll see that there's a link to episode notes on there as well. And they're also going to be available on the podcast page. So I'm going to try to make it as easy as possible for you to get access to these notes because we got a lot of great material to cover today. Now, originally, I had a totally different podcast planned. I had an interview with my husband that was fantastic, but unfortunately, I did not realize until I was in the middle of the interview, or excuse me, I should say in the middle of editing the podcast, that our audio completely went kapluck in the middle. And so we lost half of what we recorded, and I'm going to have to, probably much to his dismay, sit him down and re-interview him. The reason that I was really excited to have my husband on following the Habits podcast is my husband not only was a collegiate athlete, so he ran track and field all through college, but then he stayed on and was a track and field coach, has a personal training degree, has spent his entire career in the bicycle industry. So he has a ton of knowledge about health, nutrition, fitness, and we had a great podcast that was apparently just him and I talking, a great podcast on things that you should know and how to kickstart a health and fitness routine. So very bummed that didn't turn out, but we'll get him back on and we'll get another episode of that up. But in the meantime, this actually gave me an opportunity to talk about something that I believe is super important and something I'm really excited to talk about today, and that is your values. Values are so important. So as usual, we're going to start off the podcast with a quote. And after we go through the quote, I'm going to talk with you guys about why I'm talking about values, what are values, why they matter. So not just why I'm talking about them, but why they matter, how you can identify and reconcile your values, and then we'll end with a quote. So in a kind of same format that we're used to going through. So today's quote comes from one of the leading minds in philosophy and deep thinking, none other than the king of rock and roll himself, Elvis Presley. So I thought this was such a great quote, and I love the fact that it comes from Elvis. So to start off today's podcast, we're going to quote Elvis Presley, and he said, "Values are like fingerprints. Nobodies are the same, but you leave them all over everything you do," which is so true. Elvis is 100% right on that. So why did I decide to focus on values? Apart from the fact that I have talked about this over and over again in other podcasts and promised you guys I was going to make a podcast out of this, here is, as I sat down and worked through this, what I distilled down as the reasons why I wanted to chat with you guys about this today. How you spend your time is a direct reflection of your values, and we're going to go through that in detail. Since time is a non-renewable resource in your life, think about that. Time is a non-renewable resource in your life. You only get one time framework to live within, to work within, okay? It is a non-renewable resource in your life. Once time has passed, it's gone. Since time is a non-renewable resource in your life, it is important to make sure that you're spending your time well. So again, one of the values that I hold, and we're going to talk about this as we go through the podcast, is making the most of my time. I don't like to work harder than I have to on things. I don't like to do things that are unnecessary. I hope you don't either. And by the way, your brains are hardwired to do things as easy as possible. The absence of a strong understanding of your core values or true values In that absence, the void will be filled with superficial values. And we're going to talk a lot about how your superficial values are in conflict with your core values all throughout your life and how to identify that and end that constant conflict that goes on. But in the absence of having those strong, true core values, that void is going to be filled with superficial values that are based on external forces, instant gratification, things that are not necessarily your highest and best. So that is one of the reasons why I'm focusing on this topic. Lack of strong core values will leave you vulnerable to adopting values that are not true to who you are. We all do that, by the way. We all have values as we go through this, and you're going to identify those that are not consistent with actually who you are. You've just adopted them in the void of true, strong core values. You will never have peace and fulfillment in your life if you don't reconcile your values. And this is going to be the reconciliation that I talk a lot about between your superficial values and your true values. We are all guilty of making decisions that are not consistent with our core values. I'm going to point those out. I know you're probably not going to like me at the end of this podcast, I promise. I'm going to hit home on a few things. I'm going to hit those little places in your life that you don't really want hit. All those little insecurities we deal with, but you can't fix, which you aren't willing to admit is broken. And the why, the reason, the motivation behind your habits, why you should be thinking about changing your habits and why you should have a vision, should be driven by a deep connection to your true values. And so if I had really what I'm struggling to say, I guess, is that if you really truly want to have a strong vision, which I talked about in episodes 4 and 5, and then you truly want to make sure that you're consistent with executing and implementing good habits in your life, you're going to have a strong sense of your values. So in some ways, I got the cart before the horse by identifying or talking about those two things. But I think this is a really good subject to come in on the tail end of talking about vision and talking about habits, because now when you go back and you think about your vision and you think about your habits, you're going to be able to think about them from a place of core values. So it's going to allow you to take those to the next level. And that's partially why I put them after vision and habits, is because I wanted you to then go back once you've had the practice of thinking about your vision and thinking about your habits. Now you can go back and think about them on a deeper level connected with your values. This is a powerful step. The why to your habits, again, and the why behind your vision should be driven by a deep connection to your true values, your core values. And this is a powerful step in your self-awareness. Now, I haven't talked about this a lot, and again, I'm going to talk about this in future podcasts. I've got so much to share with you guys that I've learned over the years. But self-awareness is one of the 4 competencies of emotional intelligence. So there's 4 categories of emotional intelligence, and self-awareness is one of those. And emotional intelligence is a strong predictor of many things in your life, including success and happiness. And success, again, is something individual to each person. But not having a deep connection to your core values means that you have a lack of self-awareness in your life. And a lack of self-awareness means you have a lack of self-management. And so you're never going to be truly emotionally intelligent and have true emotional intelligence if you don't have a strong connection with your core values. So with that introduction as to why I wanted to make this topic a focus of this podcast, let's talk about what values are. So values are the conscious and subconscious fuel to your decision-making process. So you don't necessarily realize it or think about it all the time, but what you decide to do from moment to moment is based in your value system. You're actually just responding to your internal value system, your conscious and your subconscious value system. How you think, what you do, and how you behave are all a reflection of your values. So values, again, are the conscious and subconscious fuel to your decision-making, your thought process. It is really kind of the man behind the curtains. Your value system is the man behind the curtains. Now, when you're talking about values, there are generally 2 levels of values. Now, I just want to kind of throw my one little caveat in here. As I was starting to work through this material, it became very clear to me that I have a book in waiting here. There's so much I could dig into, and I'm really excited to, at some point in the future, when I finish the current book that I'm writing, I have a list of books that I want to write. And this is definitely one I'm going to write because I've not found any great material on this. I'm not saying it's not out there. I just haven't found it yet. And I think that this is something, because I've spent so much time thinking about it, that if I sat down and really, truly did the work, I could mine a lot more out of this. So that's my long-winded way of saying that these 2 levels of values I'm going to extrapolate on at some point, hopefully in the future. But for today's discussion, we're just going to put our values into 2 simple camps. And those are your true core values versus superficial values. So I want to talk about the difference. The true core values, and these are going to be the values that we really truly want to bring front and center in our lives. Those are your unique values. That's your fingerprint that Elvis Presley was talking about. That's what makes you who you are. Those are the true core parts of who you are, how you think, etc. Superficial values, conversely, are those that take the place of core values because you've either allowed external circumstances or influences or internal circumstances and influences to contradict your true values. So in other words, superficial values are the values that you allow to make your decisions for you that are not in sync with your core values. They're kind of the opposite of what I would call your core values. And I'm going to dig into that and give you concrete examples between the difference between what I call a true and core value versus a superficial value. But I want you to understand that you have both of those running through your decision-making process every day because they're important to understand the difference. True core values are in conflict with your superficial values. So let me give you an example of what I mean by that. All right, so I say to you guys all the time, thinking time, morning time, give yourself a healthy, happy morning routine. Talk about that a lot. So that is a true core value of mine, making the most of the time that is afforded to me, right? So that is a true core value. Now, what that means for me is waking up early in the morning so I can have a healthy morning routine. That's my core value. In the morning when my alarm clock goes off, I have a decision to make. Do I get up and go live my life and execute on the things that I value? Or am I going to lay in bed, hit that snooze button and stay a little bit longer, stay a little bit longer, stay a little bit longer? When I choose to stay in bed, I am letting my superficial value of comfort, feeling good, giving into that sensation of not getting out of bed and enjoying that little extra time in bed. I'm letting that superficial value supersede my core value of making the most of my time. So that is an example of where your superficial values are in conflict with your true values. Let me give you another one. This is going to be one that hits home for everybody because we're all guilty of this. Most of us would say, yes, I have a core value of being a healthy person, but our superficial values of feeling good, doing what tastes good, doing what, is convenient, oftentimes supersedes our core value of being healthy. What does that look like? Eating junk food, not exercising, not drinking enough water, not getting enough sleep. You may have a core value of being healthy, but your superficial values of feeling good and convenience oftentimes supersede your core values. This is why I say your true values and your superficial values are constantly in conflict with each other because you're having to navigate that. And this is why, again, having a strong sense of your values is so important. So that's what values are. Now let's talk about why it is important to identify your core values and identify your superficial values because you've got to end this conflict. It's a battle we all go through. Like I said, we're all guilty of this. I'm no better off than anybody else on this planet. So let's go through why it matters to identify your values. Lack of a strong sense of core values will create a vacuum that will be filled with superficial values. And superficial values are often not healthy. Lack of a strong sense of core values creates a vacuum that will be filled with superficial values, and superficial values are generally not healthy. Another reason why it matters to identify your values is that your values are what make you unique. I talk about this a lot, and I'm not going to stop talking about it because it's something I believe in so deeply. Who you are matters. You are unique. If you don't learn and figure out what your purpose is and live it unapologetically, you're going to be robbing the planet of something unique that only you bring to the planet. Your purpose is, to remind you, what inspires you and how you add value to the life of others. Your purpose is going to be found in your true and unique values. What you value is going to be what inspires you. So if your purpose is what inspires you, what you value is going to be what inspires you. So identifying your values helps identify what makes you unique. Time is a non-renewable resource. I just said this earlier, but I want to reinforce this. Time is a non-renewable resource. So use it on your core values. Don't let your superficial values rob you of your time. If you want to know what you truly value, look at how you spend your time. If you don't believe me on this, then you're not paying attention. And by the way, most people aren't. So I'm not picking on you. I'm encouraging you. I'm inviting you to pay attention to how you spend your time. So let me give you an example. I value learning. In fact, I took a test that my coach gave me. It was really cool, and it was kind of allowed me to identify my values in order. And you answer a bunch of questions, and it gives you your values in order. And my top value was learning. Well, the way that is reflected in my life is, and I'm not BSing you when I tell you this, I spend no less than 2 hours a day reading or learning. So when I get up in the morning, I go for a 45-minute walk or a run. And during that time, I'm listening to a podcast or a book on tape. At night, before I go to bed, I spend 30 to 45 minutes a night reading a book. And then oftentimes in the evening, when my husband and I are just unwinding, I sit down and I have a book in my hand. I spend between 2 to 3 hours a day reading or listening to a podcast because it is something that I value, and that value is reflected in my time. The battle between your core true values and your superficial values will leave you without peace. I want to expound upon this because I think this is really important. Have you ever done something that you know you shouldn't have done because it truly violated your core values and you feel like crap later? Sometimes that looks like lying. Maybe you lied and said something you shouldn't have said or omitted something you shouldn't have omitted. And you have that crappy feeling later of, oh my gosh, I feel yuck for the lie I just told. Or let's say, for example, you're on a diet, okay, and you're making progress and you're doing a good job and you cheat and then you feel like crap later. But you have both the physical ramifications of feeling like crap, but the emotional ramifications of feeling like crap. When you don't take the time to identify your values, you're going to be living in a constant state of no peace and no rest because you have an internal conflict going on. Now, here's what's amazing to me. Most of us learn how to tune that out. And I plead with you. I plead with you. And that's part of why I take the time to create these podcasts and write my blogs, is because I'm trying to bring awareness back to the areas in our lives that we tune out because they're inconvenient or they're painful or they're uncomfortable to deal with. We all have areas in our life where we do not have internal peace because we have a conflict between our core values and our true values. You can't fix what you won't admit is broken. So again, I'm encouraging you to bring awareness to those areas in your life where you have no peace because you're not listening to your core values. You're letting your superficial values make the decisions for you. Your why is what keeps you motivated to do hard things. The life of your dreams will require you to do hard things, and your why is fueled by your values. So Simon Sinek talks about this a lot. I've mentioned this before. If you're unfamiliar with this concept, I'll give you the 30-second explanation. Your why is your motivation. Why you get up and go to work, why you do the things that you do. Those are all derived from your value system. So for example, if your why is that you want to make sure that no animals are ever harmed ever again. You want to see all animals that, wild animals are free and not cruelly treated by humans, and domesticated animals are in good homes. That's what volunteers at humane societies and veterinarians and many other wonderful people who work with animals, their why is driven by a motivation to take care of animals. That why is ultimately comes back to their value of animals. So your why, what motivates you, is a direct reflection of your values. And again, your why is what keeps you motivated so you can do hard things. Because by the way, there is no growth in the comfort zone. So if you want to live a fulfilling life, if you want to live the life of your dreams, if you want to live your purpose, you're going to have to do hard things, period. But guess what? I have a little secret to tell you. This is really important to understand. Being in debt and living paycheck to paycheck is hard. So is learning how to be financially free. Choose your hard. Being healthy and in poor physical condition is hard. Conversely, eating a healthy diet, exercising, and taking care of your body is also hard. Choose your hard. Being a person that lives to please other people is hard. Living a life true to yourself is also hard. Choose your hard. Everything in life is hard. Choose your hard. So being connected to your why, which is driven by your values, will help you remember that the hard that you're choosing is important. It matters. Why it matters. Why is what keeps you motivated to do to do hard things, and the life of your dreams will require you to do hard things. But guess what? You're going to be doing hard things no matter what. So let that why be driven by a strong core value, and live the life of your dreams. Your why, your vision, and your habits are all going to be a reflection of your core values. And I kind of said that earlier. That's why, I put this at the tail end of the vision and the habits podcast, is because I want you now to go back and rethink about your habits and your vision through the lens of a strong foundation of your core values. Another reason why it matters to identify your values is your decisions are a direct reflection of your values. If you aren't aware of your values, you are likely not making decisions consistent with your values. You don't know what you don't know, right? Are you making decisions based upon true core values or superficial instant gratification values? Now, I want you to think about this, okay? I made mention of this earlier. I can say to you all day long, I value getting up and having a great morning session. But if I hit that snooze button, I'm choosing to value being comfortable more than I'm choosing to value being productive. Your decisions are a direct reflection of your value. I'm choosing comfort over productivity in that case scenario. And so just being aware of that is really important. So I just want to pause there and ask you, where in your life are you making decisions that are not consistent with your core values, that are centered on your superficial values? I've got 2 more points as to why values are important. I literally, this is an 8-point list, and this is after I skinnied it down. So I'm going to go back and recap on these. And like I said, I've got these available in print too, so don't stress out. I know this is a lot of material. Why it matters to identify your values. Now, this next section is really, really important, and I'm going to spend some time talking about this. Okay, this is so important. This is deeply rooted in science, both neuroscience as well as psychology. Your values are highly influenced. So you've got 2 separate camps of influence for your value system: your internal influences and your external influences. So let's talk about your internal influences. Your beliefs influence your value system. By the way, one of the most powerful pieces of information I learned is that beliefs are a choice. Beliefs are a choice based on what? Your value system. But your beliefs truly influence your values. Your emotions. One of the things that I have learned recently that is this is just such a great saying, and I wish I'd learned it a long time ago. Emotions make great servants, but terrible masters. Emotions make great servants, but terrible masters. Your emotions influence your values. Your physical state influences your values, and your mental state influences your values. So let me give you examples. Your beliefs. Okay, if for example, you believe that you are stupid, okay, you're probably not going to place a really good value on learning because you're going to think you're incapable of learning. By the way, P.S., I'm here to tell you that your intelligence can be increased, that the idea that your IQ is a fixed number is actually a fallacy. Your IQ can grow. Your intelligence can grow. Your brain is highly adaptable. So if you believe you're stupid, then you're going to have a value system that doesn't support learning and growing. That's not true. You can learn anything you put your mind to. Your brain is truly an amazing machine. You just have to learn how to learn. Your emotions. If you are a person who lets your emotions, your superficial values of emotional responses dictate your thinking, you're not going to have a very solid, healthy value system. Your physical state. Let's talk about this. Let's say you have a core value of being a productive person and you want to have a free life where you don't live paycheck to paycheck, where you're not violating who you are in order to survive. If you are physically not well because you've not taken the time to heal your body, or perhaps maybe it's even a circumstance outside your conditions. You've contracted something, you've got some terrible disease that is preventing you from having a strong physical state. Your physical state is going to dictate your value system. So unfortunately, we've got a good friend who's going through cancer treatment right now, and it's breaking my heart to watch him go through this process. But his physical state has to be his primary value system right now. He has to make sure that he gets healthy. That dictates his value system. Your mental state. Now, I want to talk about this for just a second because thankfully, for the most part, I'm mentally okay. Well, I ain't quite right, but I'm mentally good. But I am highly allergic to gluten. So if I have any sort of gluten in my diet, be it cross-contamination or I eat something on accident, somebody tells me it's gluten-free and it's not, I have a pretty severe reaction. And part of that reaction to eating gluten includes 24 to 72 hours of pretty severe depression and anxiety. I mean, it is intense. I can tell you, anybody who suffers from depression and anxiety, I know how terrible it is. My mental state in the time where my depression and anxiety is so high as a result of a gluten reaction, my value system changes to just surviving for the day because I'm feeling so ill. So your mental state has a huge impact on your values. So those are internal influences on your value system. Let's talk about external influences on your value system. This is really, really important because you want to make sure that you are being influenced by people that have the same values as you. Now, I'm gonna say a lot of things that you don't like in this next section, and I'm okay with that. That's why I started off this podcast with an episode that's called Learning to Be Uncomfortable, because being uncomfortable is okay. I'm gonna hit home on some things that nobody wants to talk about, but I'm okay with that. I'm okay with being that girl. Make sure you're being influenced by what you value. So here are external influences. Culture. Culture has a huge influence on you. And that culture, by the way, comes in many different forms. That culture comes in just the culture in your own little city. I know our little city has its own little culture. The state that you live in has a culture. The country that you live in has a culture. The family that you're a part of has a culture. The company that you work for has a culture. This is so hugely important. And to drive this point home, and I'm just going to give you a data point on this, there's a book called Good to Great by Jim Collins, one of my favorite books. It's about business. And in this book, Jim Collins, with a group of other professors, put together data points to identify the difference between good and great companies using all these amazing data point comparisons. One of the key components of what separated good from great companies in his book is the fact that great companies had a strong value system. Why does that matter? Because that value system drives the culture. So what you don't realize, and I'm not going to get too deep into this because this is another topic for another day, but when you have a void, again, of clear values in anything in your life as a person or as a company, in a culture, in a company culture, then what ends up happening is superficial values fill that void. And so what a lot of business books teach leaders to do is to become aware of that void, because what ends up happening is you end up having this subculture that exists. Please the boss, don't make the boss mad. And nobody wants a value system built around keeping the boss happy. For a million different reasons, but I won't go into that. And so you have this kind of, pecking order that develops, and people begin to, who can get on the higher, who can get the boss's attention, who can be more liked. Let's throw this person under the bus so that way I look better. It creates this really unhealthy culture. A lack of clear values will always create a vacuum, which is going to be filled by the void of superficial values. And so I thought it was so interesting that Jim Collins identified that the companies that were great companies had clear values that were consistently applied across the company culture. Another external influence for your values is your family and your upbringing. So I'm going to talk quickly about this. One of the pastors that I love listening to on a podcast is a gentleman named Chris Valaton. And what I love about Chris's sermons when I listen to his podcast is he's very open and honest. And one of the things he talks about is when he was growing up, his father was not around. And so his mother was married twice to two stepdads who were very abusive and cruel to Chris. And he talks about how growing up with very abusive stepfathers created this instinct in him to dislike men of authority, dislike father figures, and to think that men are bad in that capacity. And so he built this value that men and fathers are bad based upon his upbringing. So all of us, I'm sure, in some way inherited a value system from our family, some good, some bad. Conversely, I'm on the opposite end of the spectrum. I have two amazing grandfathers, a dad who makes the Pope look like a sinner. My dad is one of the most incredible people I've ever known. So I have a value system of a strong patriarchy. Just like my mother's, I have strong grandmothers who are amazing women, entrepreneurs, have done great things. And so I also have a strong value of a strong matriarchy. These are values that you inherit from your family. So you one of the external influences of your values are your family and your upbringing. Friends and social circles. This is one that not a lot of people like to talk about. And when I talk with my coaching clients, this is something we inevitably get to when we kind of get towards the end of our relationship and I see this huge transformation that occurs with my clients, is that I remind them that they're going to outgrow some of the people in their life. And that is a really painful process when you realize that you have people in your life that no longer have the same values as you. And while you may love them and while you want to spend time with them, they don't get a high priority in your life any longer because they just plain and simply don't fit into your current value system, the new version of you, and they're not interested in growing into better people. Your friends and your social circles will highly influence your value system. And so you want to make sure you are surrounded by the right people that are reinforcing the value system that you want for your life. I'm going to do a whole podcast on this coming up very soon. If it's not the next episode, it will be one very soon, talking about how you structure your life to have the right people in your life. I can honestly tell you that any success I've had in my life is a result of the mentors and leadership that I have had the privilege of having in my life. I've had amazing mentors in my life. And then last but not least, this is where you guys aren't going to like me. This is where I got to get to the truth bone. Media. Media has a huge influence on you. If you don't believe me, it's funny. I was having a political discussion. I don't talk about politics on my podcast because we get enough of politics everywhere else. But I was having a political discussion with somebody who, let's just say we were voting on very opposite ends of the spectrum. And the person went through the reason why they're voting for their candidate. And I said, if I could come behind you and give you a data point that contradicts every point you just made for me, would it change your mind? And the person said to me, no. And I said, that is how influential the media that you pay attention to is over your mindset. That even if I can prove to you what you believe is not true, you're unwilling to change what you think. Media has a huge impact on your thinking. So let's talk about the type of media that you're ingesting that you are most likely not aware of how much it is influencing your thinking. Music. I cannot tell you, I love music, okay? I love music, love it. But I'm very conscientious of the music I listen to, and I'll tell you why. Because it's not that I'm a prude. It's not that I think I'm better than anybody else, but it's because I understand how influential music is. So if I sit and listen to music that is about a bunch of things that I don't value, in fact, I contradict the values of that music, like, reckless sexual practices, violence, greed, drugs, alcohol, it's going to influence the way that I think about things. So I don't even allow that type of thinking into my mind. What really kind of brought this awareness to me is I was in Spain several years ago, riding in an Uber, and the Uber driver did not speak English. Thankfully, I'm fluent in Spanish, and so he had the radio on, and it was playing American songs. And at the time, there was a very popular song that was just sexually explicit and disgusting, one of the most disgusting songs that have come out of the music industry. And he's singing the words. He could sing the words, but he didn't understand what he was saying. And so I asked him in Spanish, "Do you know what you're saying?" And he said, "No. Would you translate it for me?" And to be honest with you, I was so mortified while I was translating the song to him because I had never stopped and actually thought about the lyrics until I translated them for him. And then that's when I went and realized I don't want this kind of music in my mind because it influences the way I think. Now, for all of you who are sitting here saying, "No, but don't tell me what music to listen to," again, I'm just going to ask you something really quickly. Are you choosing to let your superficial value of being comfortable and doing something you like supersede your core values of having a life of meaning? I'm not saying you can't listen to music that have dirty lyrics, but I'm saying become aware of how much you're listening to that because it is influencing how you think, whether you like it or not. Your brain is so much more absorbent than you think it is. I promise you. Spend 5 minutes with a child who doesn't have the rational skills that you have, and you'll see that they pick up everything they listen to. If you think you're any different, then you're being untrue to yourself about how your brain works. You're picking up all this stuff. Another form of media that you're absorbing your value system from and being influenced on is TV. You can watch TV that's uplifting, encouraging. Listen, I will watch Hamilton all day long, every day, over and over and over again. I love that. I love that musical. But if I sit down and I watch a TV show about sex, drugs, violence, I'm going to be influenced by that. It's going to change the way I think about the world. Social media. I'm going to pop that to the end because I've got a whole thing on social media. News. I don't watch the news anymore. I've turned it off. I don't care because we have lost the art of actually reporting the facts in this country. The fact that you could say to me, what is the conservative and what are the non-conservative news stations in this country? The fact that we could even answer that question off the top of our head should tell you that we have a problem with the way that the news media works in our country. There is one news station that plays in this house, and that is the Weather Channel. That's the only media I care to ingest. I truly have turned off all news in my life because if I want to understand current events and what's going on, I will find my own means of doing that. I'm not interested in somebody else's commentary on current events unless I'm specifically looking for commentary, in which case I will go find people who have the same core values that I have and listen to the content from them. Podcasts are a great way to be influenced. There are also junk podcasts out there, which, again, there's nothing wrong with doing some things for fun and playing. I'm not saying your life has to be all serious and no play, but become aware of what it is that you're letting infiltrate your mind because it is going to impact your thinking and your values. So social media, this is a big one. One of the things that I did a couple of years ago is I started this journey of creating a life of intentionality, purpose, living out my purpose, who I really am, being unafraid to do that. I'm practicing the courage it takes to be a person that lives your life, your own true destiny. Is I changed my social media altogether. I got rid of people. I unfriended so many people on Facebook because I was tired of seeing their crap, to be honest with you. I stopped following people on Instagram and I changed my feed to follow people who encourage me. So let me just give you a list of some of the people that I follow to stay encouraged and to make sure that my core values are being reinforced by what I ingest. I follow Dave Ramsey, John Maxwell, Tony Robbins, Simon Sinek, Brandon Burchard, Marie Forleo, Ben Corson, Craig Groeschel, Life Church. I find encouraging sources of media and then I let that be what I think through. I let that be my filter. And I'm no longer influenced by negative forces. Now, this dovetails to my next topic, which is being open-minded. So some of you may say, okay, Tiana, if you've restructured your thinking so that you're only getting inputs in from people you agree with, are you being truly open-minded? Well, I'm glad you asked. That's a great question. That leads me to point 8, which is when you have a strong sense of your values. Now we're still on why it matters to identify your values, okay? When you have a strong sense of your values, you can truly be open-minded because then you're able to ingest an idea, hear it, and decide whether you agree with it or don't agree with it, or what you do agree with and what you don't agree with. Being able to hold an idea in your mind and not necessarily have to accept it as truth is what being open-minded is. And so because I have a strong sense of my core values, I don't have to be afraid of listening to something I disagree with. I can listen to it with an open mind, filter it through my value system, keep what I want to keep and disregard what I want to disregard. Not being open-minded means you don't even ingest it to begin with. So there's a difference between what you're influenced by and then what you're allowing yourself to intentionally process against your core value system. Most of us are being influenced outside of our conscientious mind. You're being influenced by the media, by the music that you listen to, by the podcasts that you listen to, by the radio shows that you listen to, by the social media, but you're not being intentional about it. And so that's the purpose of bringing this to your awareness. So just really quickly want to recap on why it matters to identify your values. And then we're going to go from there and we're going to talk about how you can identify your values and then reconcile them so you don't have this constant battle between your true values and your superficial values. Okay, again, why it matters to identify your values. Lack of a strong sense of values will create a vacuum that will be filled with superficial values. Your values are what make you unique. So you got to know what that is to understand and truly mind what your purpose is. Time is a non-renewable resource. Use it on what you value. The battle between your core values and your superficial values is what will leave you without peace and joy and fulfillment in your life because you're constantly a conflict between what makes you feel good and what you should be doing. And again, sometimes what you should be doing does make you feel good, but as long as it's not being driven by a superficial value. Your why is what keeps you motivated to do hard things, and your why is fueled by your strong core values. Your decisions are a direct reflection of your values. So you want to make sure that your decisions are consistent with your core values. Your values are highly influenced. So if you're not paying attention to what's influencing you both internally and externally, you're likely to adopt values that are not consistent with your core values, which put us back to the earlier point. And that is then you now have lack of peace and you have that gross feeling you get when you do something that you don't you wish you hadn't have done, or you say something you wish you hadn't have said because it's a contradiction of your core values. I mean, we've all done that. We've all said something. We go, oh, I wish I had not said that. And the reason you feel that yucky way is because you've just contradicted your core value. Okay, I know this is a long podcast. I promise. Hang in there. We're almost done. I'm going to get you out of here on time. But now we're going to get practical. We've talked about a lot of hypothetical and theoretical. Now let's get practical. How can you identify your values, both the superficial that are driving the decisions you don't want to be driving and your core values, which should be driving those decisions? How can you identify them and reconcile them? First of all, pay attention to how you spend your time. Now, I talked about this a good bit in the last episode when I talked about tracking your habits, because your habits are how you spend your time, right? And I gave you guys a worksheet. It's in the show notes from episode 7. It's on my podcast page of my website, tianashoei.com/podcast or tianashoei.com resources. So I've got my resource page and my podcast page, and it's a time tracker. Pay attention to how you're spending your time, because how you spend your time is like looking in the mirror of your value system. And you're either living a life consistent with your core values, or you have a ton of superficial values that are hijacking your time. By the way, one of the worst hijackers and superficial time wasters of our day and age is our smartphones. I will do a whole podcast on how I have completely revamped my smartphone habits. I mean, completely revamped them. My phone is not allowed in my bedroom. I only allow myself to go on social media a set number of times a day. I am very intentional. Every time I pick up my phone, I make myself write it down. So that way I am not I am not living a superficial life of my next dopamine rush and that good feeling you get of being distracted versus the harder work of having deep work in your life. It's really, really important how you spend your time. So pay attention to how you spend your time. I've got a tracking worksheet available for you if you want to learn, if you want to track. I promise you, after 1 or 2 weeks of tracking your time, and it's just hour-long blocks, it's super easy. You just write down what you did in that hour. The awareness you will bring, self-awareness you will bring to how you spend your time will give you that mirror of what you need to look at to identify what your values are. Another way you can identify your values is to listen to yourself. Emotions are great servants. They're data points to be collected. What are your emotions telling you about your values? Are you truly happy? Because I can tell you this much, if you are not living a life consistent with your core values, you will not be happy. Now, happiness is a decision. It's not a set of circumstances. But again, you can be happy because you are being consistent with who you really are. Are you being honest with yourself? Where are you lying to yourself? Because that's where your superficial values are taking over your core values. And where do you violate your values? Where do you do things consistently where you go, oh, I wish I wouldn't have done that. Oh, I should have done that. Listen to yourself. What are your emotions telling you about your value system? And I came up with a whole series of thinking time questions. So again, I've got these on my website. You can download these, but I want to walk through these with you because I'm a big proponent of thinking time, setting aside time in the morning to think about yourself, to think about your day. So here are some questions that you can ask yourself when you sit down and have a thinking time session. And by the way, if you want peace in your life and you want to be fulfilled, take the time to do this. Have a value that says you want to live a life true to yourself. Do you value how you are perceived or what people think about you more than you value being true to yourself? We are all guilty of this, by the way. Do you value how you are perceived or what people think of you more than you value being true to yourself? Where are you compromising on what really matters to you because you're more worried about what people think? Where are you compromising on what really matters to you because it's more convenient or seemingly more convenient? Again, choose your hard. What decisions are you making that contradict your true values? We're all guilty of them. I mean, if you don't say that health is one of your core values, then, I would ask you to reconsider, because the best version of your life means the best version of you shows up for your life, and the best version of you is a healthy version of you. What decisions are you making that contradict your true values? If you value being healthy, what decisions do you make that aren't reinforcing a healthy body, a healthy soul, or a healthy mind? If you value financial freedom, stop buying the useless crap and start saving your money. I'm actually reading a Tony Robbins book on this, and I'm really excited. I hope to hope to have more to share with you on that, because I'm a big proponent of financial independence, because one of the reasons we sacrifice our core value of having complete freedom and independence over our lives is because we won't make the short-term sacrifices to become financially independent and learn what it takes to be a financially free and independent person. And one of my closest friends and somebody that I respect and trust more than probably anybody I know on how to make good financial decisions said he's really liking Tony Robbins' book, and it's a great read. So I'm just started to read that book, and I can't wait to learn more about that. Who and what are you letting influence your values? Do you have a healthy community around you? Do your friends have the same values as you? Or are you compromising on your values with your community, with your friends, with the stuff you let in your life? What do you wish was different about your life? Think about that. What in your life do you wish is different? What does that tell you about the conflict between your true values and your superficial values? Because I can tell you right now, the things that I wish were different in my life are because my superficial values have taken place of my true core values. What are you allowing to influence you that is not consistent with your core values? We're all guilty of this, so figure it out. Because again, this doesn't mean you have to stop all of these things, but at least bring awareness to it so you are aware that I don't agree with this. I find this entertaining, but I don't necessarily agree with it. And then limit how much you allow it to influence you. And this is just a simple question. What are your core values? What are they? I mean, when was the last time you sat down and asked yourself what your core values are? I do this a lot, and I'll tell you why. I'm a very politically passionate person. I don't talk about politics a lot because I believe it's more important to have a positive influence on people rather than just say, this is what I think and let me cram it down your throat. But all of my politics and all of my passion and belief in politics are rooted in core values. I don't allow myself to take party positions on politics. I take principle-based issues on politics. And so I say to myself, principally, what do I believe about this topic? And then I choose a political position, not a side, but a political position based on my principles. In order to understand my principles, I have to know what my core values are. And so I do a lot of thinking about this. What are your core values? A lot of people don't do that. So in summary, I know we made it to the end. Thank you guys for hanging in there. We're almost done. In summary, true fulfillment and peace will only exist when you aren't violating your core values. You will never have fulfillment and peace in your life if you are constantly violating your core values, or you will have to drug yourself out of not feeling that. And I really hope you don't choose that, because that's not a pretty road. When you have a strong sense of who you are and your core values is where you'll really truly find that peace and fulfillment. Pay attention to how you spend your time, what and who you allow to influence your values, both those internal and external factors. Listen to yourself when you violate a core value and learn from the situation. That feeling of just, I wish I hadn't have done that. Don't beat yourself up over it, but listen to it and say, I'm never going to do that again. I love Dave Ramsey's quote that says, don't make the same mistake twice. You have plenty of new mistakes to make, so don't make the same mistake twice. Listen to yourself. Listen, let your emotions be that servant when you violate a core value. Identify your true values and eliminate your superficial values. Stop lying to yourself. Truly identify what you want your life to be, and stop allowing superficial values to make your decisions for you. If you don't do these things, if you don't come to terms with your value system, if you don't identify these things, then you risk getting to the end of your life, and I've talked about this before in the Vision podcast, and having one of the main regrets of the dying, which is, I wish I had lived a life true to myself. The only way you can live a life true to yourself is if you have a strong sense of what your true values are. So in closing, I always open and close with a quote. We're going to go back to our famous philosopher, the king of rock and roll himself, Elvis Presley. Values are like fingerprints. Nobody's are the same, but you leave them all over everything you do. So you guys, thank you for hanging in there with me. Thank you for listening. Just as a reminder, episodes are released on the second and fourth Monday of every month. I might change that cadence up at some point in the future, but that's where we are right now. And, please continue to tune in. Tell your friends and family. We're going on a journey of finding what the best version of ourselves look like so we can learn, laugh, and live big. For more content, you can see my website, tianashowy.com. I've got a blog. I've got all my podcasts listed up there. I've got a whole list of resources, books that I love. Thank you guys for tuning in. Until next time, this has been Tiana Showy, Ain't Quite Right. Thank you for tuning in. For additional content, including my blog and social media, see my website, tianashowy.com. I would greatly appreciate it if you could subscribe, leave a review, and be sure to tell your friends and family, anyone else that you think might enjoy joining us on this journey. Until next time.